working with those really big questions, I kind of view the world around me and think, we are very insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but how cool is it that we get to exist? Because the odds of that happening are not in our favor. We have a very limited amount of time to enjoy the existence that we, by some ridiculously small chance, happens to be granted. And so I'm going to use that the best way I know how to, make the world around me a little bit brighter, to treat people well, and just learn as much as I possibly can about the amazing universe that's around us.
Welcome to the Bountiful Podcast, where we explore what it means to live a bountiful life. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Agnar Hall, a systems test engineer at NASA. Agnar's journey is one of resilience, perseverance, and unwavering determination, from growing up in an inner-city neighborhood in Texas with a single mom to navigating life with fibromyalgia. Agnar's story is a powerful example of using every obstacle as a stepping stone towards achieving one's dreams. In this episode, we'll dive into how Agnar balances living with chronic pain while advancing his career, the importance of seizing every opportunity, and how each challenge can serve as a guiding step towards a fulfilling life. We'll explore the lessons he's learned along the way, the value of persistence, staying true to your goals, and the inspiration he draws from his mum. Plus, we'll talk about how to keep moving forward despite the difficulties life may throw your way. Agnar, welcome to the Bountiful Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So exciting to be with you here in Houston, Texas.
Yeah, it's hopefully not too hot for you.
Isn't there a heat wave?
Yeah, there is. There is.
So by definition, super hot, but that's okay. So can you tell me a little bit about your upbringing and background?
Yeah, so I was born here in the Gulf Gate area, which is on the south side of town, still inner city. My mom was a therapist, and my dad was a musician. So yeah, I knew from a really young age, like 2 years old, that I wanted to study space. Whatever I did, it had to be something space. And so as I got older, I took the classes in high school that I knew were gonna get me there, all the physics classes and stuff, and went to the University of Colorado. They have an outstanding physics program there. Got my my bachelor's and then my master's in New Mexico, and now I'm here. Amazing.
And what do you do for NASA?
I test the software that Mission Control uses. So all of the software has to be customized. You can't just go to the Adobe website and download Photoshop for launching rockets. Like there isn't a set computer program for that. So all of the software that is used in Mission Control to successfully launch the missions, to monitor what's going on while the astronauts are up there, to control the vehicles, to control communications from the ground to the vehicle and back, all of that stuff has to be custom made, which means that there has to be a group that tests it when it's incorporated into a full system and make sure that everything is talking to each other correctly, and that, when you build a specific program, you can test that program by itself, but it might not behave the same when you integrate it into the whole system. And so that's what we test. We test the full system. Once we give it the okay, that is kind of the last step in the process before that software is pushed over to actually be used by Mission Control.
Pretty exciting, like thinking about the software you're testing is being used by like astronauts in space. Isn't it a wild concept?
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty cool, especially to see it, if you ever go into one of the viewing rooms behind the flight control rooms, like you'll see one of the displays up that you tested a few weeks ago, and that feels very cool.
So you studied astronomy at school. How has that helped you or astronomy and physics, how has that helped you with your job today?
So yeah, this is not the typical end path for an astronomer. A lot of my colleagues studied computer science. But to be an astronomer, a modern-day astronomer, you have to know how to program. You have to know how to code, because it's sort of the same story, right? You have a specific research project that you want to do. There isn't going to be some computer program already off the shelf that does exactly what you want to do. There are some tools. There are pre-built programs that you can use to, say, measure the flux of photons coming from a star or whatever. But to actually study the, specifics of the system, you have to build your own programs. And so I, learned how to write code in undergrad and, used that for my research. And so this job is sort of it's almost kind of the same role as what I did, in the astronomy side, which is I'm not just the developer and I'm not just the user. I have a foot in both worlds. And that's what I really love about system test is that, I'm not restricted to just working on the code side and I'm not restricted to just using stuff that other people have written. I can kind of dabble on both sides. I can play developer and flight controller in a sense. We write our own scripts for testing. We do a lot of the troubleshooting so that the developers don't have to spend a bunch of time figuring out where exactly the problem is. We try to approach if an issue comes up, we approach it from different angles to figure out, okay, this is probably what the root cause is. And when we write our reports, we include all of that information in the report. It's the same sort of debugging that I would do with my work in astronomy. Besides just the background of understanding like how light works and all that stuff, that's important too. The signals that we use to communicate are all light waves. Traditionally radio waves, although right now we're working on actually using optical wavelengths, so essentially space lasers for communication.
That sounds kind of crazy and cool.
It's very cool.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the optical communication, I believe the first successful run was a video of a cat that was like a cat playing with something that was beamed with a laser to move it from one place to another. The reason that we want to do this is radio waves are very, very long. They're the longest wavelengths of light. If you think of a wave, a wiggle, if you have a long wavelength, that means there's, in a given space, there's kind of one wave versus if you have a shorter wavelength, you can get a bunch of little wiggles in that same space. You can think of wiggles as sort of the amount of information that you can encode. And so a radio wave, they're nice because you can send them through the atmosphere easily without losing much information, but there's not a whole lot of information that you can send at once. And in the modern era, it's not just communications that we're sending. We're doing, video in addition to audio. We're doing, huge files of data, of information. And so if we use a laser, you can encode a lot more information into this communication. And so comparing the uplink times, how long it takes to send a particular file size over these with the usual S-band and K-band that we send, the 2 gigabyte file takes, 10 or 20 minutes? With the optical communication, it's done in 5 minutes. It's pretty cool.
So can you tell me what it means to you to live a bountiful life?
I think the most important thing is making sure that you're around people that make you happy, and making sure that you spend time with those people, because they're not going to be here forever. I actually just had some of my closest friends that, we all went to high school together and then sort of scattered. They were all in town this weekend together because one of them currently lives in Japan, and she was flying home. And so everybody kind of made it work to, fly back to Houston and meet up here. And it was, I haven't seen my friend who lives in Japan in probably 5 years.
Yep.
But when I opened my front door with her standing there, it was immediately like no time had passed at all. Those are the kind of friendships that are so vital, I think. That I think is the most important part of living a bountiful life. It doesn't really matter if you have, a big house or, expensive assets or whatever. Those things I think are very empty. They don't, they look nice, but they don't really actually add much. It's the relationships in your life that really define it.
Do you have a worldview, or how do you see the world?
My particular focus in astronomy is actually cosmology. So the very largest scales of the universe, how did it start? Where is it going? What is it doing right now? How did all of everything around us come into existence?
Those are some big questions.
Yeah, they're the really big questions. I remember being a small child. I must have been really small because I was still in a high chair, and staring at the really ugly 70s wallpaper in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, and just thinking, well, the universe, at the time I didn't know the word universe, so it was just space. Space can't go on forever, but where it ends, what's past that? And just thinking in a circle and getting really frustrated that, because, okay, whatever's past that can't go on forever, so that would have to end, but then it'd basically be just like a jawbreaker of stuff when if that's the case, then why even invoke the extra layers? Just have it be space all the way, but then that would mean space goes on forever, but how could it go on forever? I mean, just getting really worked up about that. And so, I went off and I found the answer to my question that, okay, yeah, space is infinite, and also it can expand and does expand, which is very weird and something I don't think the human brain was really designed to comprehend. And so working with those really big questions, I kind of view the world around me and think, I mean, for one thing, we are very insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but how cool is it that we get to exist? Because the odds of that happening are not in our favor, right? A lot of things had to go really, really well for us to exist. And the reason I can sit here and think about it is because that same process failed in a bunch of other places. It happened to, the one time out of however many work here. And so I wouldn't know if I didn't exist.
Yep.
But it's pretty cool that I get to. And so I think of everything in terms of, we have a very limited amount of time to enjoy the existence that we, by some ridiculously small chance, happened to be granted. And so I'm going to use that the best way I know how to, make the world around me a little bit brighter, to treat people well, and just learn as much as I possibly can about the amazing universe that's around us.
Love that. How do you see yourself?
I guess I'm just a human. I'm a very curious human, a human that likes to learn. I try very hard to be kind. I think that's the big thing that I would want to be remembered for. That's actually, my name comes from an old Eddic poem that it's Grimni's Mole is what it's called. And the gist of it is that the king's son, Agnar, sees him take this frail old man and kind of, the king is suspicious of this traveler and thinks that this traveler has a plot against him, and so he tortures him, trying to get him to, I guess, confess or to give information. And nobody really bats an eye except for the king's young son, who realizes, like, this is really not okay. And sort of against his father's will sneaks down to where this old man is being kept and gives him food and water. And at that point, the old man reveals that he is in fact Odin, the chief god of the Norse pantheon, and essentially says, I've seen what I came here to see. Your father isn't worthy of being the king, but you are. And so he uses his, magical powers to make the king fall on his own sword so that his son will become king. And that struck me very powerfully when I read it, because it's, this is Vikings, right? Vikings and slightly pre-Viking Scandinavia, where stereotypically we think of them as very, war hungry, and there's a lot of emphasis on might and on wit, but that isn't the quality that they thought was most important for a king to have. It wasn't, tactical skill. It wasn't brute strength. It wasn't even just cleverness. It was kindness. It was compassion.
I love that.
That's how I want to be remembered.
What advice would you give your 25-year-old self?
I think I would say there isn't one rote path that you have to take to reach a goal. just, don't be so hard on yourself. Don't put so much pressure on yourself. And actually, instead of feeling like you're confined to this one path, A to B to C, it's okay to meander a little bit and live life and kind of explore. You have plenty of time to reach your goals, and you can take a lot of different paths to get there.
One of our other guests used the phrase, she likes the phrase, meander down the path of possibility.
That's exactly, yes. Yes, I love that.
Can you share a little bit more about what is it about the bounty of space that just fascinates you so much, or wanted you to pursue a career in it?
It's sort of in terms of all the things that are possibly knowable, Earth is just a really tiny speck in this vast expanse of space. So most of most of existence is out there. It's not here. And we only understand a very small fraction of that. I mean, honestly, the same is true with the ocean. Even though it's part of the tiny speck, there's a ton we don't understand about the ocean. Honestly, if I wasn't studying astronomy, I would be studying paleobiology, because the history of life on this planet is also just very, very cool. I think for me, it's the possibility of what else could possibly be out there, what other life is out there, how did any of this happen? There are so many questions, and every answer that we find, of course, is going to bring up more questions. And I actually like it that way. I don't necessarily want to know everything, because I don't think we can know everything. But I think that there's a majesty to that unknown and to learning some of it.
Can you talk a little bit about your jobs that you've had? I mean, I started the intro with a bit of you've kind of had a lot of stepping stones on the pathway to pursuing your dreams, obviously working in space, working at NASA, whether it's this role or moving into cosmology. What was the pathway, and how did you sort of have the perseverance to stay on the path to eventually achieve your dream?
Yeah, so I think my first official job, aside from babysitting and pet sitting, was when I was I was a junior in high school, so 11th grade. I would have been 16. My AP Physics professor pulled me aside after class and asked me to tutor one of his pre-AP students. I had taken the pre-AP class the year before. I was the only sophomore in the class, and I got the highest score in the class, so I think he had a lot of confidence in my abilities. And I liked to teach, to explain things. In elementary school, I would help out the kids that were struggling. I mean, I already knew that I wanted to study astronomy, but that helped prepare me for grad school when I was going to be, and undergrad to an extent, where I was actually going to be teaching classrooms of students, the lab courses. So I did that, and then when I went off to college, I took on a bunch of jobs. They were all campus jobs.
Yep.
I started tutoring again for a professional company instead of just kind of doing it, after school. And I started doing research. My first research job was at the Laboratory for Atmospheric and Space Physics. I was studying old Voyager data from Jupiter's magnetosphere, because at that time, the Juno probe hadn't gotten to Jupiter yet, and so we were kind of looking at this old data to prepare for that. Yeah. When I went off to grad school, I became full-time TA and grad student. Did a lot of labs. There were a couple classes I TA'd that were not lab courses, but it was most of us. The TAs would run all of the lab courses. I ended up rewriting a bunch of labs for the online course, so I got experience with that side of academia. At that point, my fibromyalgia had really started to pop up around the time I started grad school, and it got to the point where I could barely get out of bed because I was in so much pain. There weren't a lot of medical resources around. There were 3 rheumatologists nearby, and none of them were accepting new patients. And so I ended up leaving with just my master's before finishing the PhD and coming back here to Houston, where the medical program is huge. And my mom has fibromyalgia too, and she had found a rheumatologist who was able to give her such good treatment that she had, basically almost no symptoms. And so I was like, I'll just go to her rheumatologist. In the interim, though, when I first moved back, I started working at Starbucks, which was, I think, very grounding in a lot of ways, because I had been used to being in academia, where I'm surrounded by people who, I mean, yes, different backgrounds, but kind of the same background,
deeply intellectual, super curious.
Exactly, yeah, very
want to be the best.
highly educated, whether they came from means or not, found a way to, get into a good university, get into a graduate program. Whereas at Starbucks, there were people from everywhere. There were teenagers who were still in high school. There were, one of my coworkers was former military. After retiring from the military, had lived in Alaska, and started working at Starbucks there. I mean, just people from all over. And so I think that kind of shook me out of the, academia mode of the very, like, stressful, competitive. It was nice.
So you were juggling chronic pain with needing a job, but having, like, just got your master's degree, stepping away from your PhD, which I imagine if you were academically minded would be very anxiety-inducing and almost maybe bring up a little bit of, like, a failure kind of mindset.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about, like, I guess the question I have before we get into all of that stuff is, like, did Starbucks for you feel like a step backwards, or did it feel like a gift so that you could almost just, like, do what you can whilst you healed from, like, what your body essentially was, throwing at you with your symptoms and stuff?
I mean, at the time, it felt like a gift, because before then I had been applying for jobs that were, tangential to my field. And so I'd been looking for work for probably about a year before I started working at Starbucks. And so at that point, it was like, I will take what I can get to have some kind of income and not be, like, scrounging. I mean, yeah, there wasn't shame in doing what I needed to do for a little while. I think when I lived in the same town that I'd been going to school in, that summer was really hard for me, because I felt like I couldn't show my face around anyone I knew. I felt like I had failed. I was also experiencing I had depression and kind of didn't really want to acknowledge. I kind of felt like, well, if I, just power through it, I can, be fine, which, as the kid of a therapist, I really should have known better.
Now that you say that, you're probably right. So what did you learn? What's the lesson there around, like, studies? Like, obviously, graduate programs are always going to be stressful. I think it's kind of just the nature of the beast. But is there ways that you can manage your mental health better? Is there support you can, looking back, that you could maybe put around you to?
I think really being honest with myself from the start would, and admitting weakness, I think, because I was always in this sort of rush to catch up to myself of, I can fix this. And it's like, well, for one thing, it's not necessarily that anything is broken. If you're falling behind, it's for a reason. Like, if I would get behind on grading something, I would think, it's okay, I can just sit down and just do it really quick. And I mean, I did, and I caused more stress for myself. But I think if I had, taken a step back then and looked at the whole situation, been like, there's a reason that I'm getting behind, what is it? And sort of started acknowledging that sooner, I think things probably would have been a lot easier for me.
You had some other things at grad school that kind of you talked about on our call. So I'm going to ask you the experience. So how has your experience with fibromyalgia and gender identity influenced your journey and career choices and life?
Yeah, so I knew as a little kid that I remember asking my mom, why aren't I a boy? Because when I was a kid, everybody said I was a girl. I didn't really understand why. I didn't feel like a girl. And so my mom's reaction, coming from a good place, was, I guess, worrying that I had been sort of picking up cues from, Disney movies and stuff that, like, women are the damsel in distress and the men come and save them. And so her response to my question was, women can do everything men can do, girls can do everything boys can do. And my 2-year-old self was like, okay, that's great, but that doesn't answer my question. I didn't know how to say that. I was like 2. So I just sort of went, okay, and carried on with my life. And I sort of ignored it for a long time and just sort of told myself, well, I guess this is the lot I was given, so I'm just going to deal with it. And around the end of undergrad, I graduated a semester early, so I had time that I wasn't focusing on classes and, that kind of stuff, where I had a lot more time to think about who I was and sort of realizing how uncomfortable I was on my own skin. And it got to a point where I was like, okay, I do need to actually admit to myself that, like, okay, like, I'm transgender and I can't pretend I'm not anymore. It would be my life would be easier if I were a woman, but I'm not. So I also started transitioning in grad school, and so doing that while also dealing with fibromyalgia.
Yeah. Do you think it's ever easy for anyone?
No. That's why I'm not really sure, because looking back, it's like, well, I don't really, it definitely would not have been easy when, before I was an adult, before I went to college, because unfortunately this country, and especially this state, there's a lot of stigma about, transgender people in general, but especially there's this idea that if a kid says that they're transgender, then either it's just a phase or they're being groomed by somebody. And it's like, no, the brain has a concept of gender and what its user's gender is by the time you're about to, and so a lot of transgender people have known their whole lives, and so it really is a coming out. It's not really a transition. It's sort of a finally just being who you are instead of trying to hide it. And so I'm glad I transitioned. I kind of wish that there had been a better time to do it, but yeah, I don't know that there would have been really a perfect time to do it.
And then how did chats with your mum go? Did you kind of go back to your 2-year-old self and be like, what I was trying to tell you when I was 2 was this, or did you kind of just not really bother?
I honestly didn't even really think about that. It was just it was so gradual that, I was kind of exploring it out loud with her and with friends of mine I don't know, like, I remember when I was a little kid feeling this way, and I still feel really uncomfortable in my body. And it was sort of a gradual sort of thing, whereas I was like, yeah, I guess I am transgender, but, you don't have to use different pronouns for me just yet. Like, that would sound kind of weird to me. And then over time, people started, testing different pronouns, like, hey, like, if I used he for you, like, let's just, like, do that for a second. And so I was lucky that I had a lot of really supportive friends and family with that.
I guess, do you have any advice for people that are struggling with their identity or their own feelings?
I think that if you're uncomfortable in your own body, it's important to kind of sit down and think about, why and what it is. Or even if it's just a matter of being uncomfortable with how other people perceive you, that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. There's a reason for it, and it's okay to explore that, and it's also okay to experiment a little bit. I didn't just immediately one day turn around and say, like, okay, I'm 100% changing my appearance top to bottom and changing everything. It was very much an exploration sort of thing for me. I was sort of, navigating, what if I cut my hair shorter? Okay, I like that better. What if I cut it even shorter? Actually, I like that a lot better, and then, kind of getting to the point where, I knew even, like, in middle school that I wanted a mastectomy. I was already wearing a C-cup by the time I was 10. I was absolutely super uncomfortable with it, sort of almost ashamed of it. Whereas, other girls my age were, like, man, you're so lucky that you hit puberty early, and I'm over here thinking, like, no, it's awful. I hate this. I used to wear a vest, like, even in the summer to try to, I guess, cover up. It didn't really cover anything up, but it made me feel better.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was sort of my way of kind of tucking everything in. It was like a security blanket. Yeah. And so it's, if you're kind of doing that to yourself, it's okay to stop and ask yourself why, and you're not necessarily bound to. I guess I was sort of resigned to, like, I don't feel like a woman, but this is how I was born, so I have to deal with it. And no, that's not necessarily true. And that's I think very culture specific. You know, you can look at a lot of other cultures where gender diversity is embraced. You know, the two-spirit people of a lot of indigenous cultures are respected and in some cases revered for being, you know, people who can kind of understand, like, bridge, you know, men and women and kind of understand from a bigger perspective, people who you know, take care of children and, you know, kind of feeling that, I think feeling constrained and feeling like you're stuck in a box, whether that's just the box that you were born into or the box of you're either one or the other. Like, there are no boxes. It's
or
just
the box
life.
that society forces on you.
Exactly. Yeah, there are no boxes. They're all imaginary. You can, you know, it's your life, it's your body. You can do whatever you want with it.
And how are you feeling now?
A lot better.
Yeah, it's good.
A friend of mine was, you know, we were talking before my top surgery, and I told her, hey, remind me, you know, when you visit me in the hospital, remind me that I have something really important to say when I wake up. And she was like, okay. And so she came to the hospital, and, you know, my mom was there, my aunt was there, and my friend was like, hey, you had something important you wanted to say. And I was like, yeah, I did. That's a huge weight off my chest. And she was so mad. I think she just walked out of the room.
I love that. That's quite funny. That's pretty good.
Thank you. I thought so too.
It is good.
It was literal months in the making.
Yeah.
I knew way ahead of time that,
Like,
you know,
I cannot wait. I've got this joke in the bag.
exactly.
Got this phrase I want to say. Yeah.
Yeah. See, it's the dad jokes are, you know, it's so obviously I'm not, you know, I'm absolutely just a dad bro.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate your story, and I think the more open we are about our stories, the better place the world is going to be. We all have things that challenge us in life, and it's kind of how we move through them and get over them, and also be the people that we actually really want to be, and how we show up is what matters. Is there anything in your experiences with both, like, those two things that you've kind of have been like pivotal kind of struggles in your life, or things that you've had to navigate through that have influenced your journey or career choices or anything? Or do you just kind of roll with it?
I've gotten to the point that I just kind of roll with it. I do notice, I mean, every job that I've had, especially just since transitioning, I can't help but notice how people react differently to me, kind of remembering how I moved through society before and after.
Yeah.
And that, sexism is not dead. It is absolutely, you know, I have several experiences that I could recount of just really uncomfortable interactions I've had in public spaces with men who refuse to listen to boundaries, complete strangers in some cases. And that sort of thing is completely gone now.
That is a unique perspective. Like, I wouldn't know the difference, obviously, because I will never experience that.
I didn't even really realize it until I think I was retelling a story of one of those things that happened to me, and it occurred to me that, oh, yeah, I haven't had to deal with that since I transitioned, but I still carry myself through the world with that kind of in the back of my mind. When I walk to my car, I have my keys ready. I tend to be, like, on the lookout, you know, for, like, just in case some guy comes and tries to grab me, even though that danger isn't really there anymore. There's still something in the back of my brain that, you know, you live it long enough, it just becomes encoded in you. And so I have, you know, now that I have access to male spaces where, you know, I have been in situations where guys were talking about, you know, like, women being dramatic essentially about, you know, all this stuff, and basically having a platform now to say to them, hey, that's, like, women actually do experience really awful things, and I can tell you from experience that is the case, you know. And so, like, talking smack behind their backs helps foster this culture of not believing women or, sort of turning a blind eye to women who are being abused or assaulted. It's part of this sort of this pyramid. It's all part of the same, I think it's called the pyramid of violence. That's the base of it is like sexist jokes and like catcalling and stuff. But the top of the pyramid is murder, right? There are all these stages in between that, you have to have the base of the pyramid there to be able to build on it. And so those kind of things are not okay. And before, I didn't have access to any spaces where I had the power to shut that kind of dialogue down. I take it really seriously when I do find myself in a situation like that, if I could make a difference now.
So let's chat about your mum. She's a big inspiration for you. She sounds like an awesome lady. Obviously, she's worked for NASA. What inspires you about your mum?
Well, so she had this really tough childhood, and she came out of it going, like, I have to get out of here, and really forged her own path from nothing. Her parents were from an era where women weren't expected to like have their own lives and careers. And so all of the family's money was put into her brother. And so she had to pay her own way through school. She had to pay her own way through grad school and just figure everything out on her own. And, originally she studied veterinary science because her father was a surgeon. And so she kind of had this pressure to, she wanted to be an artist originally, and he told her,
artists don't make money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what he told her, was you're not going to make a living as an artist. You need to pick something different.
We had another artist on the podcast that will beg to differ on that one.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, yeah. Tons of examples of, but, so she went, well, I like animals, and he wants me to go into some field of medicine. So she signed up for veterinary science, and there are a couple things that happened in college that made her change her major. She told me one of them was she went to an agricultural university, Michigan State, and they have, the ag programs have the cows with these big ports in their sides where you can actually reach in and like analyze their stomach contents. And so she was out there like 2 a.m, freezing in the middle of a Michigan winter, reaching into this cow's stomach. And
How does the cow feel about that?
Exactly. Yeah. It occurred to her at that point that she cared a lot more about how the cow was feeling about what she was doing than what was in its stomach. Yeah. And just sort of realized, like, no, I want to study something that, impacts people, and so she went into psychology, and she was so gifted at it. She, like 5 years into working at NASA is when the Columbia disaster happened. And some of my friends' parents still think that she hung the moon for the work that she did to help them through that. She actually won the Silver Snoopy for that, which is the award that the astronauts themselves give. Yeah. It's one of the highest civilian honors that NASA gives out.
So give me 3 things that inspire you about your mom.
Perseverance, for sure. Service. Well, honestly, humor. Yeah. We have a very similar sense of humor that I definitely got it.
Dad jokes?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely developed from her. You have to have humor going through life,
Absolutely. So moving on a little bit, what do you most enjoy about your work at NASA?
There's a sense of satisfaction when you test everything and it works perfectly and like, okay, cool, the baseline is ready to be launched. But I actually really enjoy when things don't work, because then it's like, oh boy, a problem. Like, yeah. So awesome. I like finding the problems.
Yeah, finding and fixing them. Give me one thing that's been the most challenging thing in your career so far, and then one thing that has been the most rewarding.
I think the most challenging was definitely that period in grad school of dealing with fibro and my gender transition while also trying to slog through the grad program. I think rewarding would be, well, I guess from a more practical standpoint, the coding knowledge. It's so useful to know how to I mean, even the language that I primarily work with is one that only astronomers use. It's called IDL. The license for it is super expensive, which is why nobody else uses it. But once you know one language, you can figure out pretty much any language because it's sort of the way of thinking that you're learning. It's just syntax after that.
One thing that brings you joy?
Cats. Yeah.
Didn't expect that. You know when you go through life and you like kind of bump up against like things where you're like, oh, I never really thought about it like that before. How has experiencing different aspects of life and overcoming the challenges that you have managed to overcome influenced your understanding of happiness and contentment?
You know, when I was just going through the motions of, I have to do, really well in high school, and then I have to go to college, and then go to grad school, and then do a postdoc, and then do a professorship, and that is like the path that I have to take. It's very confined. And I think one of the first things that started to pull me out of that mindset was actually meeting Dr. Jane Rigby, who actually this year won the Presidential Medal of Freedom. She's the chief project scientist on the James Webb Space Telescope. She actually went to grad school with my advisor. They were students in the same program, and back in like 2017, she came to give a colloquium to our department about the James Webb. It hadn't launched yet, and she wasn't as high on in the hierarchy at that point. But she, came to talk to us, and we took her out to dinner, and she was telling me about her path because she is not a professor. She works at Goddard Space Flight Center at NASA, and that was the first time that I kind of stepped back and went, "Hey, actually, as an astronomer, I guess I don't have to just be a professor. I could do something else, and still do research. And it doesn't have to necessarily be this
linear
track
path
that I have been told we have to follow." And so I'm really grateful for the conversation that we had, because that was it was shortly after that it was the next year that I ended up leaving to get my fibromyalgia treated. And I definitely felt despair, but I think having that knowledge of like, this isn't necessarily the one path you have to take to get where you want to be was very reassuring.
So changing gears now, I'm going to ask you quick-fire questions.
Okay.
They're very random, just full disclosure. What, in your opinion, is the most underrated fruit or vegetable?
Ooh, probably mango.
I'd agree with that one.
I'm a huge fan of mango.
Me too.
Or pandan, pandan is it's a leaf that is used in a lot of like Southeast Asian cooking. It's like a really sweet sort of just like leaf, and it's delicious.
It's definitely underrated. Maybe unheard of for some people, but fantastic, thank you. What's your favorite cocktail?
My default that I'll order is probably like a tequila old fashioned. The bar cocktail lounge really that I go to that's around the corner of my house has a cocktail that they made specifically for me in their system called the Agnar. That would probably be my really actually favorite cocktail. I don't actually super know what's in it.
Okay.
But there's like coffee and banana and cream.
It actually makes sense as a good play on words. Worst meal that your parents made you eat?
Probably lima beans. Yeah, do not like them.
Word that describes your life?
Interesting.
Okay. Interesting, good?
Yeah.
Good. What are you most proud of?
I guess just getting where I am today through all of the stuff that I've had to deal with so far.
Do you have any tenets that you live by or principles?
Everyone I encounter is sort of automatically a friend to me, unless and until they show themselves to be otherwise.
I like that. Give people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
I think the world would be a better place if more people did that. What is one thing that has really mattered that maybe you didn't realize mattered at the time?
I mean, it sounds cheesy, but I guess friendships, really. I mean, and it's not that I didn't realize that they mattered before, but I don't think I realized just how vital and important friendships are, and interpersonal relationships, finding happiness. I am always the happiest when I'm with the people that make me happy.
Yep. And the inverse, what is something you thought mattered but realised that it actually doesn't?
Titles. I always thought that people wouldn't take me seriously until I had a doctor in front of my name, and that's not true. And it also, I guess, expediency. There was this, I felt like I had to get things done like as quick as possible to almost like to prove myself in a way. Like no one's gonna think that I'm actually, capable or, smart if I don't like show them that I'm absolutely the best and I did all this stuff really early. And it's like, no, that doesn't matter at all.
Do away with urgency.
Yeah. Urgency. Yeah.
What is your dream job?
I mean, I am going to finish the PhD eventually. I don't know that I necessarily want to dive into academia. I honestly, like a postdoc somewhere, like a permanent postdoc, sounds like it would be really nice, even though that's kind of considered like less than a professorship. You get to just do research and not have to worry about the sort of politics that come along with academia. The kind of thing that Dr. Rigby does, actually, where there's some research that she does that she, has to do on behalf of NASA, that, these are the things that we want studied. But some of her time is also devoted to her own personal research interests. Yep. She gets to split her time half and half. And I really like that model, of I don't want to be completely directionless and have it all be up to me, because that's way too much. Just, the sandbox is kind of too big. But having some direction of like, well, you have to do this, and then you can kind of do whatever you want. I like that. Give me a little bit of a direction, and then kind of let me tinker in my spare time.
My final question for you, and it's a big philosophical one. You have spent a bunch of time trying to answer some of life's hardest questions that there aren't many answers for. What are some of the answers that you've found in like your kind of like man's search for meaning, or like, life in the universe? What does it all mean? Like, do you have a few things where you're like, actually, this is what I've learned?
Yeah, so it seems like if a spot is conducive to life starting there, it seems like life actually starts up pretty easily, shockingly easily. On Earth, the fossil record really starts after what's called the late heavy bombardment period, which is basically the early solar system. There's still debris flying around everywhere, and a bunch of that debris is smashing into planets. Just that's how, when the moon was formed, some big objects struck Earth and tore a bunch of Earth off that started orbiting Earth and then coalesced into the moon. It's a very, violent environment. As soon as that stopped, the fossil record starts, which sort of hints that life was trying to take hold during that time and may have even already existed that early on and just wasn't macroscopic enough to really create fossils. And so for it to happen that quickly, when Earth didn't even have the atmosphere it has now, it was a much more oppressive atmosphere. It seems like if a place can have life, it's gonna get life pretty quickly, which is part of why we're so interested in Mars, because Mars was probably habitable in its early life. We know that there was water on it. It carved channels. There are dry lake beds and riverbeds on Mars. So if we can find some fossils there, that would kind of be another indicator of, oh, actually life pops up really easily. And so kind of that, taking that track a more philosophical direction, the universe is a lot more interesting and varied and I guess more fun than a lot of people think it is, I think. There are, almost definitely organisms elsewhere. Whether we will actually ever interact with them is a different story, because there's only so fast that you can travel, unless we find some way to create a warp, or, a wormhole or something, right?
Future generations have hope.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Agnar, for sharing your insights, thoughts, perspectives, feelings with the Bountiful podcast. It's been wonderful to have you on the show. For those of you listening at home, I'll put all of your work and the links in the show notes below. Don't forget to rate and subscribe. Maybe share this with a friend if they're interested in any of the themes that we've discussed today. And tune in to the rest of the season. We've got extraordinary guests from diverse backgrounds, all contributing to our understanding of what it means to live a bountiful life. So thank you so much, and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.